All right, guys. So welcome back. We're going to talk about chapter 5. We're going to talk about infancy today. And infancy, we're going to find that it's just a time of rapid growth for children. We're going to talk about physical growth. We're talking about cognitive growth. We're also talking about emotional growth and what this looks like in children. Different theories about it. So one, we got physical development. It's a time of rapid growth that happens from birth to 2 years old. The average weight of babies like 7 to 7.5 pounds. They're 20 inches long, but then a year after their birth, like these things increase like drastically. So you got your infant's length like increase about one half, and then your infant's weight almost triples here. So this is what happens inside of physical development. Now, as we think about infancy, as we think about this stage, I also want to just keep us in mind that this is a very critical stage. This is a stage where infants are vulnerable. So we consider infant mortality. And even we just think about this number that 21,000 deaths happened in 2018 for infants. And it was due to birth defects, preterm birth and low birth weight, injuries, sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, if you're unfamiliar with that, and maternal pregnancy complications. So we want to understand they started out as a zygote, got to birth, then get to infancy. Still, they're very vulnerable. And we want to kind of keep that in mind as we consider this. But also, I want you to notice something else. I want you to look at this chart real quick as we think about infant mortality by just race and ethnicity. You see, there's a significant number for non-Hispanic blacks, but then you go to the other side, you got Asian, then you got non-Hispanic whites, and that's lower. And it makes us ask this question and wonder what's happening to the culture or around the culture, what's happening in the environments, what's happening in the communities or with this culture that results in a much higher rate for infant mortality. So because we consider human development, we want to keep culture in our side of view because it's important and culture affects things. So I say this not to say I have answers. I say to say for us to consider this, and we consider human development to have this cultural thing in your background. How does that affect certain things? So now we come back to kind of these developmental milestones and how their rapid changes. Their body shape and composition is kind of changing. You notice, babies' heads are a little bit bigger when they're born, but they're growing into their head a little bit more. Their motor skills are starting to develop. So they're reaching these kind of developmental milestones, but also like nutrition. Proper nutrition is a very important thing for them to develop healthily. So with that, it brings up this question and sometimes this debate and this argument that people have in this conversation about breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. And we want to be honest, like ideally it's helpful for babies to have breast milk up to 6 months. And it not always the case. Research now, they're not always support data admits things about that, but we don't understand like it's what we see from some research is that like it's ideal, and then we just see the stages of breast milk and how it goes from colostrum. This is how proteins goes the first 3 to 4 days. You got transitional milk, it's like 14 days. Now both of these are like this is not mature milk. The baby's not getting all the things that it needs and wants at the time. But then you got about 2 weeks in. That's when your mature milk kind of comes in. The protein, the fats, carbohydrates, and minerals and vitamins there. But you have this conversation about just breastfeeding and bottle feeding. And there are benefits to breastfeeding. There are benefits because there's a less risk of allergic reaction, there's stronger bones, advanced cognitive development, and easier transition to solid food, and lower risk for obesity. So one of the things I want to keep in mind too is that because a lot of times breastfeeding is tied to motherhood to such a degree, and this is me just remembering stories and operating off insights that others have told me that a mother that doesn't feel like they can breastfeed doesn't feel like they are being a great mother. But I want to just help us to understand a couple of things that both are viable options. Both have advantages and disadvantages whether you choose to breastfeed or bottle feed. Neither one is one of those that come down and say, hey, you're deficient because you don't do one or the other. They're both viable options. They both have advantage and disadvantage. For example, I'll just use one just for bottle feeding. It has the advantage of the father can help. The father can feed the baby and do some of the feedings and can help. But anyway, I just say that to say that when we think about this conversation that people are having, their cognitions, their thoughts, their our mindsets and belief that comes with it. But we want to consider this as we're considering just the human development and things happen to the human body, that both of these are viable options. Both of these have advantages and disadvantages. And neither one is just like, oh, it's above the other. I mean, there's research, even if a baby is bottle fed, that there is nutrients, they get, the things that they need to develop. So then we got like, we're moving on. Now we got the brain development. And man, do you believe it? The first thing that kids' brains are more active than adults' brains. I know that may seem amazing, but it's true. And it's true because you got to think about it. A child has just come out of the womb, and even if they're further removed from the womb, they're still learning about everything around them. So they need the capacity to take in a lot of information. Even during sleep, their brain is still working. Their brain is still processing as if they were awake because they're trying to take in all the information about the environment that's around them. They're putting together these pieces and these patterns, and their brain is working and continually like growing. And typically at age 5, like that's when it reaches like its adult size, like 3 pounds. But until then, like it's developing, it starts at like 1/4 of a pound, and then it like goes from there, 1/4 of its adult size, and then it kind of goes from there. But there's just this development is kind of happening here, and we can see in this little picture just those different areas in the brain. And even look at this chart. You can see right here. You can see at birth. Okay, brain's not that big, but then it's growing here, and you can see it goes up to like 5, and this is where it kind of reaches. It's close to its adult size because it's growing so rapidly from birth to 5. You can see just this big like. But then that growth kind of slows. It doesn't stop, but it just slows down just a little bit. And brain development, in order to understand brain development, you understand a little bit about the brain. I won't go into too much just brain chemistry or brain anatomy and different things like that. But I think it's just a few things we need to understand. So the brain is made up of neurons. These are the cells that process information. They send these electrochemical signals. They send the messages throughout your brain, throughout your body, throughout your brain that your body works and moves. But then you got axons. Axons are your output. They're sending the signals out, and then you got your dendrites. They're receiving those signals. So your brain is made up of tons of neurons, axons, and dendrites, sending these messages and firing to different parts of the brain, different parts of the body, so that your body moves and develops and everything. And inside of a child's brain, there's a lot of that's going on because they are learning so much, taking in so much like information. Their mind is very active. And then you got the myelin. So your myelin is this myelin sheath is this thing that comes around those connections that are made in your brain. The myelin comes around those and keeps those connections firm and keeps them connected to make sure like, all right, these patterns, these things that are happening inside of our brains, like they stay together and you stay like firing. For example, I mean, you think about us now, you think about going into a building, your brain now has this thing in it that says, oh, you should be wearing a mask. We wear like masks and different things like that. Like your brain makes that connection prior to before, the pandemic and different things like that. That probably wouldn't have thought in your mind. You probably wasn't thinking about, I need to find my N95. But now your brain is keeping that. And the more you do it, the more it happens, the more it occurs, the firmer that connection is, the miles around to keep it connected. And then you got synapses. Synapses are kind of like these small gaps in between the neurons, and actually where some memories are stored. We'll talk about that just in a little bit. You got motor control, so you got this development, and you can see from kids the development starts like up and down, but also it comes like across. So you know, think about this of like, think about a child when you're first holding a newborn, they can't hold their head up. They need their head to be supported. But then their neck muscles get stronger, they can hold their head up, and then it works its way on across, but then on down, and you can see this through like the crawling and creeping, because as they're creeping, they're not exactly crawling. Their stomach is actually on the ground. Their abdomen is still on the ground. They're crawling. Once again, the top, they're using most of the top here to get that across the floor. But then you got crawling, it works its way on down. And now your knees and your legs are kind of moving, because that's how the kind of development works. You'll see a child kind of creep or scoot across the floor before they will crawl, just because of how their body is developing and strengthening itself. And then you go from there. So they get to the crawling. Now they're going from standing to walking. And you'll know about 7 to 9 months, like they're able to like hold up most of their weight. But you'll see the first steps are they're kind of clumsy. They're kind of wobbling side to side, and their feet are down and heavy and delivery. In this, I got a video linked right down here. You can go and check that out later. We won't like look at that right now, but it's just a cool video to kind of show like this baby's development from just standing and wobbling to like actually just taking some steps. And you can see some of these milestones in your chart. This is also in your book, where they go from like, all right, they can lift their head to like, all right, they're walking easily. And you can see like those developmental like time frames where this usually happens. Failure to thrive. Failure to thrive is one of those times where like, man, the baby's weight is not where it should be. Their physical growth is not where it should be in their like first years of life. And they're in the bottom 3% for height and weight. And there's some organic thing that kind of happen. There's things that happen in their body, whether it be like a GI like thing, gastrointestinal disease, or a problem with their nervous system. But then there are also some non-organic things. So it's maybe it lacks a physical cause, but maybe there's some environmental things like poverty, neglect, abuse, ignorance of good parenting practice. And one of the things this is just emphasizing, once again, as we think about just even these non-organic like reasons for a baby to develop failure to thrive, it's the sense of like the social affects the biological. Going back to that biopsychosocial model, that we have the social, the environment, the poverty, neglect, abuse, and ignorance of good parenting practices affecting the baby's biology, their weight, their physical growth. And then we got sudden infant syndrome. There's not really, we really can't say we found just a cause for that, but it is just a really, kids die at a really high rate of these things, but we don't know the cause yet. There are many assumptions, but we still just don't know the cause for it. Sleeping disorders. I know a lot of parents thinking about, oh man, sleep. That is the challenge. That is the thing. And some kids have sleeping disorders, and sometimes it has nothing to do with the parents. I know that may be hard for some to believe, but sometimes it's just nothing to do with the parents. It's just, and there's nothing wrong with the child at times. There's nothing wrong with the child. The child's not physically or mentally anything. Just because they don't sleep, they may just have a sleep disorder. But infants need about 16 to 17 hours of sleep in the first week, and out of age 2, and then you want to think about REM sleep. This is when they're really getting into like their deeper sleep. Now, as you get older, you go into less deep sleep. But we, as children, they use a lot of that. And guys, I even show like this little like humorous thing, because sometimes it feels like you're trying to put this baby to sleep really carefully, because if you make the wrong move, boom goes dynamite. They're waking up and they're screaming. But anyway, it's just a comical thing. But so yeah, we can see with this chart of like, your REM sleep, like it's really high the younger you are. And then as you get older, you get less and less, sadly. Perception development. So as we see just kids here, like they're developing a little bit more perception of and how they're experiencing the world is kind of changed. They have a growth of thought. They can start to regulate their emotions and having social interactions there. And so they're and just different perceptions that develop. Even if you think about just the patterns, depth, orientation, location, movement, color, all these things. They're trying to perceive these things a little bit more. And here are also just two videos with links here, which just shows like the baby's like perception of depth, but also just visual perception, because there are things like the baby can have like facial recognition. They can recognize like certain faces. Now they prefer, as we talked about in the last time, they prefer mother's face, but they can recognize like other faces. But they're also starting to have some auditory like perception. They start to perceive the sounds, and they can locate the sounds in certain directions. Like you can snap over here and they turn their head. You snap over here, turn their head. Like this, it's getting clear for them, and they're hearing mother's voice, and that mother's voice is like, oh, there's mother. Mama is around. Like they're being able to discern these things a little bit more. These are things that kind of developing cognitive development. So we see like Piaget. We learned about Piaget and his like his stages of development for children. So typically, like he's thinking like they're in this sensory motor stage, and these are the stages. And this chart is in your book, so I won't go over it. But he said, you know, you meet these like these milestones in this sensory motor like period where object permanence, where got another link to a video right there to kind of show where, because object permanence is the idea of knowing that a object exists even though they can't see it. So you may encounter it sometimes with like kids where you'll play peekaboo with them and you'll hide your face, and you know what happens for some of them is they lose interest because they're like, you're gone. They don't believe you're still there. They can't believe like your face still exists because they can't see it. And then the sense of space and causality, they're like, all right, this means this. They're cause and effect. Their time sequences. They're starting to develop at this sensory motor period. So these kind of four major accomplishments. So one of the things that we got some feedback. We got some critical feedback for Piaget. So some of these things he puts them in like a sequential order, and this is what they do at like certain months. But research has been done to kind of find that children can have these tasks a little bit earlier. Like they can develop object permanence up to like 3 to 4 months from like what the research is like saying. So that lets us know, okay, all right, there's some room for critique here, and his method is not, his theory, is not foolproof. Infants and memory. So there's a lot, infants are trying to remember a lot of things, and they're storing their memory. They store their memories in those little gaps between the neurons, those synapses. And the more they use those memories, the more they use those memories, like the patterns are strengthened, and they're forming these synaptic like process, like forming new like connections and different things like that. They're strengthening those neural connections in their brain to be like, hey, I cried last time, and when I cried, mama came, so I'm gonna cry again, and mama's gonna come and she's gonna feed me. So those memories, the child is using that to learn about the world, learn about these patterns, and strengthening these neural connections. So they're learning language, and they're doing some things like really quick, and like one of the things interesting things like fast mapping. So they're just learning. They're learning really quick how to use context clues of like, okay, A and C means this, A and C means this. Like they're processing. Once again, they're taking in so much information. They're trying to learn about the world because they're like, this is how I'm going to survive. This is how I'm going to make it. I'm taking in all this information. They're making those patterns, making those patterns really quick. And they want to understand, man, even by age 5, like they're using sophisticated language users. We'll see in just a few of certain theories about language development, but as they're growing, they're continuing to expanding and refining their language skills, and they're trying to learn the rules of language. So you got Vygotsky and his like language development. So you got like pre-intellectual speech, like this is crime, this is cool, and you got naive speech. And then you got like egocentric speech. And egocentric speech is very interesting, where kids will talk to themselves. They will talk whether there's anyone present or not. Like you'll see some babies and they'll just get off by themselves and they'll just start talking. Vygotsky said, "Hey, this is egocentric like speech," and then they have like this inner speech. And the key milestones is that, quick, they learn, they got phonology, the sounds of language. Then they learn semantics. They learn, how do I put these sentences together? I need Baba. Like, I need Dada. Like, and then pragmatic, like, how do I communicate? How should I communicate these things? And then social and emotional development. So they're developing just relationships, and these relationships are affecting their development. So think about, man, they're playing and they're helping them with physical, but also social. They're talking and communicating. This helping them with language. They're understanding themselves and others. Like, this is cognitive development. Then their attachment, like they're learning about emotion, learning to be emotional. And developing like these relationship with mom, particularly because they see mom as like this source of relief and satisfaction. And due to this, like mom is learning how to discriminate between like the baby's cry to be like, oh, that's a hungry cry. Oh, that baby's feeling discomfort, or oh, that's not anything to worry about. The mom is learning to distinguish between those, because the child is developing like these relational patterns with mom. And reciprocal relationships. So I think if you're hearing that word reciprocal, and it should bring to mind this, the reciprocal self, of what we talked about in our first lecture, how we are made to be in unique relationship with one another, and that helps us to develop because we are made in the image of God. We're made to be relational beings. So we want to think about just how the parent's interaction with the child, like in any other relationship, like interact with the child, helps in development. Or if there's no interaction, it doesn't it can delay their development. And we know even just parents, like they get their the relationship is strengthened for them also. So it's this reciprocal thing that we're learning and developing with each other. And then the role of emotions in development. So one of the things we just understand about infants, they communicate through emotions. That's their language. It's their language. It's how their cries, their giggles, their laughs, all of these things like are helping them and communicate like through these things. Like as a typically, like as an infant, they're not emoting for no reason. Like there's a reason behind it, but it also helps them to learn about like social exchanges. Once again, if I cry, dad comes to pick me up. If I cry, mom comes to feed me. They're learning about this. They're learning how to communicate their needs to others, to be like, all right, I'm poopy, like I pooped, like I'm gonna cry, and hopefully they'll check my diaper because I cried last time. Or I giggle and I smile, and guess what? They smile back at me. Or I laugh and they start picking me up, and they're learning about these things. They're communicating. Kind of timetable of emotion, like this is in your book, but you can kind of see how the emotion kind of develop from like pleasure, disgust, and then later on in 18 is wonderful ones. You got shame and defiance that kind of develops. Examining attachment. So attachment is coined by John Bowlby. So he just talks about how intimate relationships between the mother and infant is essential for mental health, because a child's need is for his mother's presence is great, and his need for food. So it just talks about how this, even in this infancy stage, what is happening for the child will impact them much later in life, because they're learning from mom, they're learning from dad, and how people interact with them, and how they should display their emotions or not display their emotions. So guys, I have a video here. It's seven minutes, it's somewhat long. I say, man, go ahead, and I would say it's a good thing to kind of watch But there are different styles of attachment. This book, this video will explain a lot more. But one of the things, ideals, is that secure attachment. That the child is, if they have this attachment style, like they're confident, they're resilient, like they're reactive, like they can engage the world, they can trust the world because they know that they have a secure base in mom or dad. Like this is the child that, like, when they see mom and dad, they look back and they run because they realize mom and dad is secure. Mom and dad will come get me. And temperaments, this is just saying, like, everybody, different people have different theories about temperaments, whether it's biological or whether it's environmental. But here's just how some people have broken down like the temperaments, from like the easy child, the difficult child, slow to warm child. And you can see like their activity levels, their approaches to withdrawal, their adaptability, their quality of mood. Like this varies depending on like their temperament. All right, guys, so that is the end of our lecture. So yeah, if you have any questions about some of these things, like, please let me know. Shoot me an email. Guys, I hope you're doing well, man. If I can help you with anything, and just make sure you're staying on top of your quizzes. Make sure you're paying attention to discussion boards, working on your iSearch paper. If you hadn't sent me anything about a book for your book review, please let me know about that as soon as you can, because that has to be approved from me, and when it's approved, like, that's just giving you permission to start working on it. All right, and guys, if you need anything, like I said, let me know. Have a good day.